Hi guys, it's Collin. Today we're going to make the new Parker on the Porch Plain Jane Mini Quilt. So this is releasing in 2 days on Friday, October 24th, and it's so cute. It's a perfect blank canvas for whatever you dream about. You could put anything on it, or you could use really pretty fabric and just leave it plain. So whatever you're thinking is going to be really cool. This one I made as like a welcome sign for my entryway, and I made the mistake of showing my neighbor and she thought it was so cute. She asked if she could have it. So we'll give this one to her, and today we'll make one for me. Now, normally for mini quilts, I use poly mesh, but today, since we're making a mini quilt with a lot of satin stitch and applique, I'm going to use a heavyweight a heavyweight cutaway stabilizer. Cutaway. Do not use a tearaway for this project. This is a heavyweight cutaway stabilizer, and that will support the stitches for the satin stitch here. So for all mini quilts, they follow the same basic process, which we will go over today, and then we will add in when we add our design. So we have our batting, cotton batting. We have our main fabric for our top. This is an off-white linen. It's beautiful, simple fabric. It's the same one I used for this one. I really like it. I use it for a lot of these projects. I have my back fabric that I will cut in half. I have not yet. Okay, I have my 4 pieces for my sides. So my top, bottom, and my 2 sides. These are cut really wide. You don't need quite this much fabric, but I cut them to 2 inches. It's just the easiest way to do it. These are the pieces for our pumpkin applique. We're going to do the same design here because, this is what I wanted for me. Just have to give that one away. And then I have this for our bias tab on the top. So it's not a real bias because I just cut it on the straight grain, but you'll get the idea. So our first stitch is going to be to stitch our placement line, which I will do, and then we'll come back. Our first stitch is stitched here. And so now we know where to lay our batting. So I'm going to take my batting, and I cut this to 10 by 10. There is a cut chart included with this pattern and all Parker on the Porch patterns. So you follow that. This is 10 by 10. We're going to stitch down our batting so that we can cut it out of the seam allowance. Now that our batting's tacked down, we can cut it out of the seam allowance. So this second line is just set inside the main line just a little bit, and that's just to help you turn it a little bit smoother. It reduces the bulk in the corners. This is an optional step. I typically do it. I don't spend a ton of time doing it. I just kind of try and cut this down as close as I can without spending 5 minutes doing it. So here we go. And then the next step that we're going to do is we're going to put on our top fabric. So that's the first fabric that you'll see in your final product. And so here we go. We're almost there. Sorry, I'm kind of slow at this. So again, I'm using a nice off-white linen, and we'll link that in the supply post for you in case you wanted to use the same color. It's a really great, just standard product that's good for everything. It's really soft. It doesn't have a ton of weight to it, so it has a nice little drape. It's a great fabric. Anyway, there we go. Okay, so the next step is we will put down our top fabric. So I am going to, the next step is going to tack this down. So it tacks it down first. Then we'll run our quilting, and that first tack down stitch makes it so that your fabric doesn't shift while the quilting is stitching. So I'm going to do both of those, the next 2 steps, and come back. Now that we've tacked down our main fabric and we've done our quilting, it's time to add the applique. So I have followed so far the first 4 steps of the Plain Jane Mini Quilt, just as it was written. So the next step in that one is it will stitch along the sides here to show the placement of your sides that will flip and fold here. So I chose to add my applique now. You can add your applique pretty much at any point before you add your back. So I would be mindful of what you're choosing to add. So see how this one kind of has these lines that continue all the way out to the border. So for me, it was important that I added that before I added my sides. If you had a smaller applique that didn't have the border, you could add it after you put on all your sides, but before you put on the back. So it really just depends on what you're making. The easiest way for me to remember is to do the quilting and then add the applique. And then I can change my mind a little bit later if I want to. But that's the safest way that I do it. So you can do however works for you. Our next step will be to start this pumpkin applique. So the first thing it does is it stitches the placement line for the stem here. and then we'll tack that down and we'll get going from there. So I'll run that and I'll be right back. All right, now that we've stitched the first part of our applique placement here, I can get my piece of fabric ready, and I took off the paper back from the heat and bond light. So remember, you want the sewable kind. So I'm going to place that right here, and then we're going to tack this down, and then we'll come back and trim it. It's this beautiful sage green. It's the same color as my entryway. So whenever I'm making something for my entryway, I love to bring that in a little bit because it blends really well. Anyway, let me stitch that down and come back and we'll talk about the rest. Okay, we've put down our stem piece here. So we're going to go ahead and cut that out. Now to cut out an applique, you want to get as close to the stitching as you can without cutting into the stitching or cutting into your top fabric. So I don't want to cut into my pretty white linen, which I've done before. It's very sad. Try not to do that. So I tug a little bit with the fabric. I kind of tug the fabric up at the same time that I'm cutting. So that helps me. I think everyone does this a little bit differently. This is probably my least favorite part of embroidery, if we're being honest. I don't know. I feel like it takes forever and I always miss a little spot or I cut something or, but it does get better with practice. So here we go. We're almost done here. And then our next step is it's going to run the satin stitch along the stem, and then it's going to do the placement for the other parts of our pumpkin. So it's a two-part pumpkin like we saw in my neighbor's new welcome sign right here. So it's going to do the satin stitch here, and then it's going to draw our placement lines for these two pieces. So I'm going to run both of those and come back. All right, so we did our satin stitch around the stem, and then we have our placement lines for our pumpkin. So this one's a little bit bigger, so I cut a bigger piece of fabric for that one. We'll go ahead and pull the paper backing off of our heat and bond, and then we'll place these. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just to keep this video from being really long, is I'm going to tack the fabric down, I'm going to trim around it, and then we'll come back. Now I have my pumpkin tacked down, so you can see I used a slightly different orange, but it's the same idea as this one. So the next step is going to stitch these satin stitch lines right here, these vertical lines down the pumpkin, and then the one after that is the outer edge of the pumpkin. So Jen separated them, so you can use 2 different shades of orange or 2 different shades of whatever. I am chronically indecisive, and I would spend like 4 days choosing 2 shades of orange, and I wish I were exaggerating, but I'm not. So I'm going to use the 1 shade of orange, and it's the shade of orange I already had in my machine. So it's going to match well enough. I'm going to run the first step. We'll come back and I'll show you, and then I'll run the second one. We'll go from there. Here's what it looks like after the first pumpkin stitch. So you can see it kind of did these 4 lines right here. The second one will do the outer edge. I'm going to use the same color orange. You may choose to use a different shade. That'd be really cool. So let me run that and I'll come back and we'll talk about the rest. Now that our satin stitch is done on our pumpkin, the next step is going to be the satin stitch here. So you can see here that it does extend out a little bit into the borders. So it's going to run this one, the bottom one, which I have in brown. It's going to run this top bean stitch here that's decorative. And then I'm going to run the letters. So mine's going to look almost exactly the same because I'm making, I already made this for me and then I have to give it away. So I'm making this one for me too. But I'm going to make it pretty similar to this one because I really like this one. So I'm going to run the stitching here, the bean stitch, and then I'm going to run the letters and we'll come back to talk about the rest. Okay, so now we've stitched our border here, our decorative bean stitch, and our word. So I chose welcome because it's for my entryway, but I think it would be really cute with your last name, or you could say thankful, or you could put fall harvest, or whatever you're into, you could go there. So the next step is going to do the curly Q up here in the green. I'm choosing the same color green. And then we're going to stitch the placement lines for our fabric. So I'm going to do those 2 and then I'll come back. Okay, so we've stitched our curly Q and our placement lines here. So this one starts on the right. So we'll tack down our right one and then our left one and then the top and the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I want to start with my fabric. So I like to cut my fabric on a straight edge when I'm going to line it up here. So, and then here it is lined up, right? But you can't have it just lined up. You need about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can use a little bit more if you want to, or a little bit less, whatever works for you. I aim for about a 1/4 inch. So what we're going to do now is it's going to stitch down basically between these two lines here and here. We're going to flip it over and sew it down. So, but we'll do that together. I will show you this first and then we'll come back. All right, we've tacked down our first side. So I'm going to go ahead and get my masking tape. I'm going to smooth this over here and kind of finger press along this line. So I'm going to, well, let's see. I'm going to tape it down 2 times. I'm going to tape it a little bit here. So masking tape is what I use. You don't want to sew through masking tape if you can help it. So I always tape well out of the seam allowance. So I'm going to tape that here, and then it's going to sew here. We'll come back, we'll do this one, and then we'll keep on going. All right, so we have this sewn down. So there's 3 more sides, right? We're going to move to this one next, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm using a non-directional fabric here, so it doesn't really matter which way I place it. If you're using a directional fabric, make sure you test it first to be sure it's pointed in the right direction. So we're going to go ahead here, once again, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to stitch it down and flip it. So I'll come back when they're both flipped. Okay, now that I have both of my sides on, I'm going to go ahead and cut this excess fabric out of the seam allowance for the top and the bottom. So that's going to reduce the bulk in the corners, and it's just going to make it lay a little bit nicer. So you want to leave still about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you can see I'm not cutting all the way down to the stitch line there. I'm cutting about a 1/4 inch above that so that there's just a little bit more of a seam allowance. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You won't see this. So if you're like me and you don't cut it straight, it's okay. We're just cutting some bulk out of the corner, so it'll turn out a little bit nicer. All right, so there we go. Yeah, see, and I totally butchered that, but it's okay because no one will see it. So the next thing we're going to do is it's going to stitch this top one. So I'm going to lay my top one down here, right? We're going to do 2 more stitch and flip. So we're going to stitch, flip. Then we're going to come to the bottom. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to stitch, flip. So I'm going to do both of those and then come back and we'll talk about the hanging tab. Okay, we're back and all of our sides are on. So it looks great. The front is done. I went ahead and I ran the placement stitch for the loop that will hang on the hanger. So you can see it right here. So you can just stick your hanger through that and you can display it pretty much anywhere. So I made what I like to call a fake bias tab. I say fake bias because I didn't actually cut the fabric on the bias. This is just a cut of straight grain fabric. If you're binding a quilt or, going around corners or somewhere where you need a little bit of give, cutting on the bias is really important. For this, it's not really important. So you can cheat and cut it straight and call it a bias tab and I won't tell anyone. So I folded it in half and then I folded it in half again. So you can use a cut chart for your measurements or you can use a ruler. So I already measured this, so I know it's 5 1/4 inches from here to here, right? So I cut my fabric 10 1/2 inches in length, folded it halfway, and then I folded it halfway again, and I ironed it. And so now I have my loop. So I need my tape, and this is just like any other mini quilt where you hang it. You want to make sure you have your loop going down, and you want to line it up with your placement stitches. So I like to line mine up with this right here, just to keep a straight line. You don't have to do that. Looks like mine is going to be perfect right there. Look at that. Okay. So I go ahead and I tape that down right there. And then sometimes I go ahead and I tape it down right here too. That way the fabric won't shift. So the next step is it's going to start here and it's going to tack this down from side to side. And then we'll put on the back. So I'll be right back to talk about that. Our loop is on. And now the last step is for the back. So remember, we're going to turn this right side out. So it's right sides together for the back. I'm going to go ahead and leave this piece of tape right here because this will have a little bit of loft. And, most machines can clear it just fine and yours probably can. But let's just go ahead and leave that right there. So you want to make sure that you have your right sides together. Make sure you have your direction going the right way if you're using a directional fabric. And make sure you leave 1/4 inch seam allowance everywhere. So I cut these pieces very generously, so we have plenty of seam allowance. I finish both edges typically when I make a quilt, mini quilt, or a hot pad or anything like that. I just prefer it. I don't know. That's how my grandma taught me. That's how I do it. You don't have to. If you're only finishing one edge, make sure you put it down first. So when you finish both the edges, it doesn't matter. But if you're only finishing one edge, make sure you put that one down first. I tend to overlap mine just a little bit there. I'm going to double check my seam allowance. Looks like I got it everywhere. Yep. Okay, perfect. I'm going to put on the back and then we'll turn this pretty girl right side out. All right, we are all done. The embroidery is done. So now I'm going to pull this tape out real quick. If this were round, I would use my pinking shears for sure. Since it's square, I'm going to go ahead and use my rotary cutter to trim this down. I'm going to line up my my 1/4 inch line with the outside edge, and then I'm just going to cut these off like this. It is a lot faster than using scissors if you're already set up for this. If you're not, then, you know, by all means, use your scissors. Use whatever you have. No one will know. Here we go. And I'll clip my corners in a second here too, and I think I just moved that camera, sorry. Let's see. I'm just really getting into it, you know. All right, so here we go. And then I'll cut this little triangle on my corners a little bit. I don't know if that really helps. They say it does. We'll see. Okay, and now to my favorite part, turning it right side out. Let's see what we got. Ooh, looks good. All right, so I'm going to use my favorite turning tool that Anne's husband makes. These are fabulous. Okay, here we go. Let's poke those corners out. And then since we did use some fusible interfacing on the back of our applique, we will definitely want to go ahead and press this. Although, let's be honest, you have to press everything anyway. Take our tape off. Oh, look at that. Ooh, I don't know. It might even be cuter than the one I made for my neighbor. What do you think? Ooh, I don't know. I think I might be getting the better one. She's going to be jealous. So here we go, my friends. The Plain Jane Mini Quilt, Pumpkin, applique, both releasing on Friday, October 24th from Parker and the Porch. Can't wait to see what you make. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye.